MSI announced their competition to the likes of the ROG Ally and the Legion Go at CES back in January 2024. At the surface, it pretty much looks like MSI asked ASUS to borrow their factory and spray paint the Ally black, but we do have a bit more under the hood to differentiate the claw. The handheld gaming PC space has been mostly dominated by AMD. Intel options from 1xPlayer and Aya have come around, but they're easy to throw aside when a more powerful and more efficient AMD counterpart is just right next to it. The MSI Claw is powered by an Intel Core Ultra, which promises both respectable mobile gaming performance and power efficiency that should put it right up against AMD's offerings. I think my real question is, does the MSI Claw and its Intel chipset actually bring us anything more worthwhile compared to the AMD options already out there? Or are we going to find that Intel is just as power hungry and underperforming as it has always been? There's not a ton to say about the actual box for the MSI Claw, other than my curiosity of how much Ubisoft paid to be featured all over it. Unboxing the MSI Claw is very like unboxing a Windows laptop, and it kind of sets the stage for the worst thing about these handhelds, the setup. As soon as we open the box, at the very top is a little pamphlet which not only prepares us for the need to install Windows updates, but seemingly also requires additional updates from MSI as well. Underneath the device is more papers and the power brick. We usually get a block with a wire attached, but this one more resembles a laptop charger. It's on the bulkier, less portable side, but I actually don't mind it since it results in a much longer cable, and it should be easier to plug into a power strip without taking up multiple slots. Moving on to the device itself, it's pretty funny to see the Intel sticker plastered right on the front. MSI and Intel seem very proud of this, but I'm a little skeptical. First impressions holding the Claw is that it feels so similar to the ROG Ally, except you can tell that the Claw is definitely heavier. The ROG Ally weighs just 615 grams, and the Steam Deck is a little bit heavier at 620 grams. The Claw comes in at 674 grams. While the weight difference is definitely noticeable, the main plus is that the Claw doesn't feel unwieldy. Its weight distribution is pretty balanced and comfortable. The Claw is actually both wider and taller than the Ally. It's smaller than the Steam Deck, but not by much. Spec-wise, the MSI Claw comes in 3 different configurations, but all 3 configurations have a 7-inch 1920 by 1080 120Hz IPS touchscreen with support for variable refresh rate between 48Hz and 120Hz. It's got 16GB of RAM, a 53 Wh battery, Wi-Fi 7, and Bluetooth 5.4. The Claw is powered by the Intel Core Ultra, which comes in 2 different configurations and, confusingly, 3 different price points. There's the Core Ultra 5 with 512GB of internal storage for $699. The higher-end chipset is the Core Ultra 7, which starts at $749 and comes with 512GB of internal storage. The final configuration is the same Core Ultra 7, but with 1TB of storage for $799. As far as the feeling of the device, we've got good feeling Hall effect analog sticks, although the cap is strangely flat, so you don't get like an awesome grip. Through gameplay, I've actually also noticed that there's some grinding on the edges, which has left some permanent scrape marks on the analog sticks, which is a little concerning. The circle D-pad does feel pretty good. It's a bit clickier than the Ally's circle D-pad, and it feels like it requires a little bit more pressure, but I do like the feel of it. The ABXY buttons are pretty large and also slightly rounded. They feel just fine, even if they are a little bit rounder than I would like. A cool thing with the ABXY buttons though is that they actually have RGB support. All of the marketing material showed the ABXY buttons in red, which just looked so ugly to me. So I'm actually happy to see that they're not really red, and you can just turn the RGB off altogether if you want. The front of the device also has our start and select buttons with shortcut keys right underneath each of them. At the top of the Claw is where we'll find the stacked triggers. The RB and LB buttons feel pretty good edge to edge, although they are a little bit soft feeling. The RT and LT triggers are Hall sensing, and they feel nice and smooth to press down on. The top of the device is also where we've got the volume rocker, headphone jack, USB-C port with Thunderbolt support, a micro SD card slot, and a power button with a built-in fingerprint sensor. The entire top of the device is lined with ventilation. A handheld gaming PC wouldn't be complete without some corny text, so the claw went with True Gaming, just to make sure you know this isn't fake game. The back of the claw is just a massive cooling vent with 2 programmable macro buttons and a massive MSI logo. I'm a big fan of all these fans, and I have a feeling we're going to need to keep this Intel chipset as cool as possible. You can also see how pronounced the grips are for the controller from the back, which definitely helps with ergonomics. Powering up the claw for the first time, we have to do the whole Windows setup, which also meant a pretty lengthy update process. The first boot to get to the setup wizard took nearly 30 minutes, with just a spinner with the text "just a moment." It was then followed by the regular setup process and then a very lengthy Windows update, and I wasn't able to opt out of it until it was already like 80% through. The whole process took over an hour, and then we still had to do a few more updates through the MSI launcher. Once we're all up to date though, we can finally explore the launcher. It's got that corny gamer vibe to it, but it does look like it at least has prioritized the important things front and center. The top section shows our game launchers. They act as quick shortcuts. If you don't have them installed, it will take you right to the launcher's website to get it downloaded. In the middle is where our games from the various launchers will appear. I've noticed that it doesn't scan for games on your micro SD card though, and when you manually add games to the launcher, there's not much you can do to customize them. So for example, when I added The Last of Us Part 1, it just shows up as launcher.exe and I can't change it. The bottom has some quick options for things like TDP control, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, notifications, and more settings. TDP control lives under the section called User Scenario, which I can't help but be nitpicky about, and what the heck kind of translation is that? How about power management or performance instead? The TDP control is set to AI by default. The other options are Extreme Performance, Balanced, Super Battery, and Manual. The AI option I assume is optimizing the right balance of game performance and battery life, but it's a little ambiguous. The manual option lets you choose a manual TDP to set for when it's on battery and when it's connected to power. Or at least, that's what I'm assuming is meant by the AC and DC tabs. You can actually set the TDP all the way up to 40 watts, and that's the most that I've seen on any of these handhelds. The AI TDP option is a little weird because it has other implications, like RGB on the analog sticks and the ABXY buttons being controlled by AI somehow. I chose to turn that option off and just change the RGB myself. For the RGB control, I went with a matrix vibe with green for my analog sticks and ABXY. I wish the RGB was a little bit more nuanced in its control, like brightness control or individual RGB per button, or even setting the analog sticks to a different color than the ABXY buttons. None of that is possible. Something a little bit more hidden about the MSI Claw is that it actually comes with a free copy of the world's first quadruple A game, Skull and Bones. You only have until the end of April to redeem it though. It does require you to create an MSI account and submit a few photos of your receipt and the Claw's barcode, and then MSI will review it and get back to you with a redemption code. My submission actually strangely got denied, and I just haven't gotten around to resubmitting it yet. As I was searching for something to differentiate the Claw from other handhelds out there, I actually discovered that one of the launchers is the MSI app. I launched it not really sure what it meant, and it turns out that it actually has the full Google Play Store. It seems you can install pretty much any Android app. I couldn't really think of many Android-only games, so I tried out Pokemon Unite. Even one step further, the MSI app will automatically apply some on-screen button mapping, and it actually works perfectly. One slightly weird thing is that when I logged into the Google Play Store, the activation came up as a Samsung Galaxy phone, but I'm assuming MSI isn't doing anything malicious, right? I usually go game by game for PC gaming performance and talk through my experience with each one individually, but straight up, I struggled to find titles that ran well on the Claw. I always start with Cyberpunk's benchmark test. I tried different upscaling methods and quality just to see how much we can really push the device. But even with the Claw plugged in at max TDP, I couldn't get the benchmark to go over 34 FPS, which still saw a few dips below 30 at times. This probably results in a fairly playable experience, but I was really anticipating something a bit more at these low settings. Resident Evil 4 was a pretty bad experience. I tried different variations of performance and TDP settings, and even though there were moments where it seemed like it would be fine, it just really wasn't very playable. I could even get pretty high frame rates, but the stutters make the game unplayable. Last of Us Part 1 wouldn't even start up at all for me, it just always crashes. Hogwarts Legacy at low settings was almost decent, but it does stutter quite a lot, just like Resident Evil. Grand Theft Auto 5 is extremely well optimized and can even run well on lower end handhelds. But just like Resident Evil and Hogwarts Legacy, there's just constant stuttering, making the game totally unplayable. I found Helldivers 2 to actually run pretty decent on the claw, which is surprising since it's the newest game I tried, but it ran with most of the sound missing and I couldn't figure out how to get the real-time monitor for the FPS to show. So like, it worked, but not really. Just to get something running smoothly, I tried out Cult of the Lamb. Cult of the Lamb is a game that is not very demanding, so it actually does run just fine on the claw. Balatro is another insanely easy game to run, that's also fine on the claw. Sometimes only half of the audio plays, sometimes no audio plays, sometimes the controllers aren't detected, and sometimes the FPS counter just doesn't work. To fix these issues, I usually have to reboot and just hope for the best. With an Intel chipset, we have the potential for some better performing emulation, so we're gonna skip right to the good stuff. Starting with PlayStation 2 and Burnout 3, it actually runs absolutely perfectly. Graphically, the game looks great, but I do want to point out that the AI setting seems to think we need to run this at a pretty high TDP. Moving along to GameCube and F-Zero GX, without changing any settings, it also runs incredibly well at a pretty stable 60 FPS. Wii U and Breath of the Wild actually runs great too. It's not a perfect 60 FPS, but we're consistently getting above 40. Little Big Planet 2 and PlayStation 3 is surprisingly pretty good. It's not perfect, and it drops frames pretty regularly, but if I remember this game correctly, it never played at a stable 30 frames per second on a real PS3 anyway. Xbox 360 with Red Dead Redemption was pretty abysmal, hitting a high of maybe 10 FPS at times, but mostly running below 5. Switch emulation has mixed results, but I started with Red Dead Redemption and I was actually getting a mostly stable 30 frames per second, so it's kind of awesome to see since that port is pretty great. Super Mario Wonder runs, but it has major frame dips, making it unplayable. So while you will get some varied results with Switch, I think the emulation overall is pretty impressive actually. In general, I'm just finding that the MSI Claw performs way worse than these AMD handhelds. The ROG Ally and Legion Go have the AMD Z1 Extreme, and while you won't get an all-day battery life or anything like that, you can run games at a surprisingly low TDP and still get some pretty great performance. Resident Evil 4 Remake at 15 watts on the Ally gets well above 70 FPS at times, but the same settings on the Claw is totally unplayable. The Claw seems to just require more power to hit nearly the same frame rates, but nearly every game still stutters. The competition out there is strong, which is great for consumers because of all the options we've got. We've got the king of handhelds, Steam Deck, which even outdid itself with the recently released OLED model. On the premium luxury end, Ayaneo is delivering impressive handhelds, albeit at a higher cost. The Legion Go offers a unique take on the handheld gaming experience with their FPS mouse mode. And then we have the ROG Ally, which to me is a better MSI Claw. My point being is that there's a lot of choices at a lot of different price points. All of these devices have their own downsides, whether it's price, size, or even value. But in the case of the MSI Claw, it's just not a winner in any category. The MSI Claw feels like a straight up botched launch, and I'm a bit uncertain if there's anything on the horizon that's going to change that. If I was a regular consumer, I would be returning this device. But for the sake of the channel, I'm hoping that I can post a video in 6 months about how wrong I was about the Claw and how great it is now. But as always, that's just my opinion based on the time that I've spent with this device. I'm always curious to know your thoughts, so leave them down in the comments below. Give me a follow on Twitch so we can unbox and get some first impressions of new gaming devices live together. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos, and thanks for watching. I usually go back to whatever device I'm reviewing, but it just made me just enjoy the Ally even more. So I think it's time that I go back to Resident Evil 4 and finish that, but I'll be doing that on the Ally.